Okay, good morning. We are doing Test on Base today. We're starting at the bottom of Test on the Aleph. Says the Gemara. We're three lines up from the bottom. Daber no be'ozne ha'am. Right? The pasuk tells us in Shemais that HaKadosh Baruch Parshas Boy Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, please speak to the people and tell them to take the Klei Chesed Klei Zav from the Mitzrayim. Amri Devei Rabbi Yanai, Ein na el loshen makasha. No, whenever the word no appears in the Chumash, it means a lashon of asking. Now, obviously, it doesn't always mean that, right? Al toichlum imenu no v'asham avusha b'mayim. It can also mean raw. We can't get into the etymology now, but no generally means a lashon of bakasha. Kale no refa no law. So Amalei Hakadosh Baruch Hu l'Moshe b'vakasha I'm begging you, please, leich ve'amor lehem liYisrael. Please go and tell the Jewish people, v'akasha michem, I ask you, shalu mitzrayim klei chesed v'klei zav. Please ask the Egyptians for the klei chesed and the klei zav. Shelo yoyma. We're turning the page. So that tzaddik, the great tzaddik, who Avram Avinu is going to say to me, he's going to be breaking on me. He says, "Rebbeinu Shalom v'Avod Avinu is some kiyem bohem." Right, the pasuk told us, "Yodei Teda kiger yezarach be'ersol lehem v'Avod Avinu is some aber me'ashana." But the pasuk also continued, and what the pasuk say, "The gamas hagoy asher yavodu dana noichi v'achrei chen yetzi b'rechush gadol." So Avraham Avinu is going to be angry at the Rebbeinu Shalom because it says in pasuk "V'avodim v'inu oisam kiyim behem." That you managed to mekayim that. They had a big shibud in Mitzrayim, but v'achrei chen yetzi b'rechush gadol like kiyim behem, but you didn't, in fact, keep what it said at the end, which is they're going to go out with a great inheritance. So fundamentally, the Gemara's challenge, Rabbi Yana is saying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to Moshe Rabbeinu, you need to ask them, you need to push them that they should go to the Mitzrayim and ask them for the stuff, ask them for the gold and the silver. Mashal Adam she'echosh ve'sasurim. You know what the example is, like a person who's in jail. Adam might see an oischol machar. You should know that tomorrow you're going to be released or whatever in the near future. You're going to be very wealthy. I'm not asking for anything. Just please let me out today. I don't want to hear about tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to be released and I'm going to get a lot of money. I want to get today, and I don't care if I get any money. And the Gemara then continues the same point. What does mean Ilum? The pasuk tells us Vayash Ilum. Rabbi Ami says that they were asking Bal Karchach. Ikadam Bal Karchach in the Mitzrayim, Ikadam Bal Karchach in Israel. Sometimes it was Bal Karchach in the Mitzrayim, meaning that they didn't want to give it. I mean, the Jews went to Chazal say during Choshech. Later on, the Marsha Hedden tells us that the Mitzrayim complained, they want the money back. So in what sense, maybe it's Bal Karchach of the Mitzrayim, but as we just said, Vikadam Bal Karchach in Israel. It could also be that it was Bal Karchach for the Jews, that the Jews were forced to go collect from the Egyptians all the recompense, all the gold and silver for the work that they had done over all these years. Those that say that it's the forcing of the Mitzrayim, that meaning that the Al Karcha was on the Egyptians, that they had to part ways with their money. Right, that the housewives were able to divide up the spoils. In other words, the idea being that even everybody was able to get from the spoils of Egypt, even those that didn't, go forcibly to do it, they still managed to get a lot. Why was it a burden for the Jews? Why they had to be forced to do it? So we had just mentioned before because they just wanted to leave. But now we're adding an additional point that when you're traveling, when you go into the airport, you're the family with the 8 suitcases. You're like, right? It's very hard to travel like that. They didn't need an extra suitcase of all the Egyptian stuff. Sure, it's important, it's great, but remember, they were in a rush. They had to leave, and they were not looking for more burden. So Moshe Rabbeinu had to push them because they didn't want Oishet Tzaddik. They didn't want Avram Avinu to complain and say, "Vavod Nevi'inu Oisam Kiyim Behem." But V'achar Chen Yetzi B'Rechush Gadol Lo Kiyim Behem. This is the first bit of the Gemara today. The Gemara then continues. The Gemara says, "What does it mean by Natzlu Es Mitzrayim?" They sort of emptied out Egypt. They took out all the good stuff out of Egypt. What does it mean? They made it like a snare. They made it like a trap that had no dagon, that has no sort of food, which would be entrapping the birds. Rashi explains that the way you get the birds in is like dagon toxin today. So you have a trap, and underneath you put in like the food that's going to be attracting the birds. And the birds will come and they'll get stuck. When there's no doggone and there's no honey, there's no food that would attract the birds, whatever it is that they eat. So ain't a panela, then the bird's not gonna turn to it. He's not gonna go. So to the Egyptians were emptied out of all their money. That's what the Targum says. It means that they were emptied. That's what Mandamar. The other Mandamar says. So that's Rabbi Ami Kimtsuda She'en Bo Dagon and Rish Lakish Omar Asur Kimtsula She'en Bo Dagim. They made it like a mitzula which doesn't have dagim. What is the mitzula? Says Rashi. Mitzula is yam, like the deep sea. Koloimar says Rashi, giving you his fishing knowledge. The seichat tohaim ein mitzuyin dagim. In the deep abyss, they don't find the fish. Elal sfas hayam, rather on the edge of the sea, on the top of the sea. Heichadik mazin, where you find the food. Now, I had to stop over here and do a little bit here just to show you. I brought out a handout. Please pass around. Take a look. So in the sea, there's divided between the continental shelf and the various different trenches, but the majority of the seafloor is known as the abyssal plain. And that area is flat. It's like a plain, like the Great Plains here in America, and there's nothing there. It's always thought to be no fish. If you look there, I quoted from Wikipedia, the abyssal plain is empty of fish. Nowadays they say, oh, there's other biodiversity there, but nothing lives there. And we know, even in the deep sea, there's not much in the way of food. So at night, every night, it's an amazing migration. Right? We all know about the Great Migration in Africa, but every single night in the ocean, there's an amazing migration. The fish that live deep down, thousands of feet in the ocean, they all come up to the top, and that's when they feed. As Rashi says, this is where the life is. That's where the food is, and that's where all the fish that live in the deep sea, they come up at night. I just want to mention one more point on this point before we move on, and that is that if you look in Vayikra and Parsha Shmini, there's a Ramban. The Ramban's trying to explain about the fins and the scales. Why are certain fish kosher and why certain fish are not kosher? So the Ramban says, "V'tam snavikas kesses." Why is it that the fins and scales make something kosher or not kosher? Says the Ramban, "Ki ba'aleim sheichlim no'olam be'elyon hamayim." The fish that have fins and scales that live in the top of the sea, and they get special kind of from the ear. They get certain benefits in that way, and that's why they get these scales, which are like here, like nails for a regular human being. And continues the Ramban, and he says, however, the fish that don't have the fins and the scales, they reside deep down in the nether reaches sort of the water. And therefore, because there's no the same ear doesn't exist there, that's why they don't end up with these scales. And therefore, these are the not kosher fish. That's the Rambam makes a distinction between the fins and scales and the non-fins and scales. I'm pointing out here now that there's different kinds of levels of deep water, right? If you go fishing with me ever, you will know. That's the only reason why I know this topic. If you ever go fishing, you will see that near the beach, there is also, let's say 50 feet of water. You have fish that will swim towards the top and fish that are on the bottom. And fish on the bottom are 100% kosher. No question about that, right? For example, everybody here heard of flounder? You heard of cod? Maybe cod has other issues that's not for our topic now. But fundamentally, fish that live on the bottom, flounder, fluke, sea bass, cod, they're all kosher fish, blackfish. There's no issue with them in terms of kashrus, even though they live on the bottom. But we're not talking about that kind of level of bottom. We're talking about obviously a much further bottom, and those fish generally are not kosher. There are a few exceptions. Let's say, for example, tilefish, which lives by the continental shelf, very, very deep down, and nevertheless still is kosher. And there are other fish that do live deep that are kosher, but oftentimes you find a lot of non-kosher fish in the very deep waters. But what Rashi's talking about here, what we're trying to talk about in terms of what Mitzrayim was like, is the Metzula Yisrael. We're talking here about the really deep abyssal plain. There's no fish there. Here we're not talking about fins and scales or anything like that. Here we're talking about literally having nothing way deep down in the deep sea. Okay. Continues on the Gemara. So either way, the Egyptians were emptied out. There's a lot of room right here. Yeah? Either way, the Egyptians were emptied out either like a snare that doesn't have any dug on or like the deep sea that has no fish. Yeah, the next is another pasuk in the beginning of Shemais. Notice how we don't have a Manda Omar to open up these words. right? We are in the middle of the narrow lines on Testament Bays, about a third of the way down, about half of the way down. The pasuk says, "Eya asher eya." Right? This is a pasuk when Moshe Rabbeinu was being introduced to the Rebbeinu Shalom and the Sneh. So Hashem says to him, "Eya asher eya." I will be that I will be. What does that even mean? It's one of the most deep and inscrutable psukim in the whole of Tanakh. We can't get into any more now other than that. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, "Lech amar lam Yisrael, ani ha'isi machem shibud zeh." I was with you with this shibud. I'm here with you in Egypt. V'ani ha'yeh machem shibud malchus. I'm going to be with you in future shibudim as well. Amar l'fan Rebbeinu Shalom. Daya Litzara Beshaita. So he says, thank you, but no thank you. I understand that you're with us in the Shibudim Mitzrayim, but why do I have to tell them that you're going to be with us in future Shibudim? Who needs to know that there's going to be future Shibudim at this stage? Let's first get out of Egypt. Okay, so just tell them I'm sending you out of Egypt. Don't say to them that I'm going to be with you in the future Shibudim as well. Continues the Gemara. This happens to be a Gemara that we just saw on Vavam and Beis, and we will come across this, not this Gemara, but the same pasuk again on Lamed Aleph on Beis, and over there it becomes a very fascinating Gemara indeed. Not that this is not fascinating, but over there it is unbelievably fascinating Gemara, which we will deal with then. Now we don't have the time. So the pasuk tells us, "Aneni Hashem Aneni." Eliyahu Navi is diving to the Rebbeinu Shalom. He's saying to the Rebbeinu Shalom, "Please answer me." So Amar Abavo, Lama Amar Eliyahu Aneni base pamim. Why did Eliyahu Navi say Aneni 2 times? Amar Eliyahu if Nekadosh Baruch Hu Rebbeinu Shalom Aneni shetered esh min hashamayim. Please let the fire come down from heaven. V'toichal kol asher al hamizbeach, and let it eat up everything that's on the mizbeach. Remember, this is Eliyahu Navi on our Carmel, where he's having the battle with the Nevi Abal, 450 Nevi Abal. And this is going to be the time when the Jewish people are going to see the fire coming down from heaven, and they're going to say, Hashem Elokim, which becomes the highlight of our Ne'ilah prayer. That all comes from that moment. So the Gemara is asking, why did they have to say Aneni twice? So Aneni, number one, is that the fire should come down from heaven and should eat up all of the animal that I sacrificed here. But Aneni should tasiach daitam kadesh l'yom ma'asek shafim. Also be mesiach das. Normally we know, right, that you're not allowed to do Mesiach Das, right? You wear tefillin, what do you have to do constantly? Mar tells us in Yuma, you have to be touching the tefillin all the time, right? We do B'Shach, B'Kamak, B'Siach, Sedech. Why do we do that? We touch the tefillin not just to make sure it's in the same place, but also, I mean, maybe some people shackle a lot, right? But the reason we're touching the tefillin is also to remember we're wearing tefillin. You're not able to Mesiach Das. We learned out from Kabbalah Mitzitz, the same way by the tzitzit. Yeah, you're not, the Kohen Gadol is not able to be Mesiach Das, so it's we're not able to be Mesiach Das when we wear tefillin. So we always touching the tefillin in order not to be Mesiach Das from the tefillin. So the Gemara that Eliyahu Navi says Aneni twice. The second one is to be Mesiach Das from the people. Please make sure that they don't start saying that the reason for the success of this carbon, that it was fire came down. Remember Eliyahu Navi, in order to show the Nevi Abal that they were totally off, what did he do to the carbon? He took the carbon and then he poured all this water on the mizbeach. He tried to make sure that no one would ever have a possible doubt that this fire was not from heaven, right? And this is after waiting a whole day for the Nevi Abal to bring their carbon. He says, "No, daven harder, daven harder." Maybe your gods are sleeping, and he's making fun of them. Oh, but he gives them all day, and at the very end, at the time the sun is going to set, so then he shafts his carbon and he pours all this water on the mizbeach, and he says, "Aneni Hashem Aneni," and the fire comes down, boom. And everyone recognizes that's what they say Hashem Elokim. So his second time he's saying Aneni is please make sure that they do not say that it was Ma'aseh Keshafim Shnem Ba'atasi Boisa Esliv Ma'achiranis. Because as it says in Pasuk there, right after it says Aneni Hashem Aneni, he says Eliyahu Navi to the Rebbeinu Shalom, Ba'atasi Boisa Esliv Ma'achiranis. You're the one who caused their heart to be turned away against you. That, as I say, is going to be the big drashim later on Lamed Aleph on Beis, a very fascinating topic of Hashem and as it were being accused as being at fault for our sins. We can't go into more now, but for our purposes now, just to mention, as we already mentioned very quickly in Vavam Beis, is what's the word here? The second Aneni, he's davening, they shouldn't think it's magic. When it comes to his Hilchos Shedi Torah, Paraches Halacha Aleph, the Rambam writes that we as Jews do not believe in the Rebbeinu Shalom because of miracles. Why not? Because miracles are yesh bahen Daifi. It's possible to think that it was magic. We're not yet up to Shmais, but all the miracles that are done, says the Rambam, it cannot be that we believed in their Rebbeinu Shalom because of all these miracles. Rather, the reason we believe in Judaism, the reason we are still practicing thousands of years later, is because we saw with our own eyes, we heard with our own ears, Maimon Har Sinai, and all the other miracles that happen. They're very nice. They're icing on a cake, but they're not fundamentally the reason that we believe. Why? Because any miracle can always be said, well, maybe he's David Copperfield. I mean, whatever the version of David Copperfield will be that can do those kind of miracles, I don't know. But maybe there was some sort of incredible sleight of hand, some great magician who manages to trick us all. And therefore, maybe Moshe Rabbeinu is the greatest trickster. You wouldn't know. So therefore, we do not believe on the basis of miracles, and that's why Eliyahu Navi is concerned that people shouldn't say that it was magic, and therefore he asked the Rebbeinu Shalom a second aneni to make sure that people don't get confused. Okay, like I said, in Lamed Aleph and Beis, we will see this next part of the pasuk become the fundamental drasha, and it becomes very fascinating. So we finished the first Mishnah and Brachas. First Mishnah and Brachas. What do we end up learning out? When do you have to say Shema? At night and by day. When is the time at night? May Messiah. We have all these different opinions on Beis and Beis. We won't be able to go through them now, but fundamentally the halacha is from Tzeis. That's when the halacha is that you're supposed to say Shema at night. Yes, you can say after Shkia, as we do over here, and many people do, but that's not the ideal time for saying Shema. You're saying it because you're davening tefillah, but really you have to say Shema again. When? After Tzeis. You can be Yotze in theory, the Shema of the after Tzeis with Kriya Shema Lamita, but you really shouldn't, because Kriya Shema Lamita, most people are saying there's the first paragraph, and that's not really the full Shema. So even though Rashi was mashma, maybe you could do it. Taisus disagreed fundamentally. Really, ideally, you should be saying Shema, the full Shema, after Tzeis, not in the bed. Again, if you go like the Meiri, who doesn't hold the Kriya Shema Lamita, is literally in the bed, but he said it's some of the Lamita, and he's saying it with Kavana. So okay, then you could do both. But that is basically, how long did you have until say Shema at night? Remember all the various opinions of the Mishnah. Mishnah told us until Shema Rishona, Chatzos, Alois. We ended up saying it's until Alois. But B'shas Adchak, we saw Kedai, Lismach, Reb Shimon, right? B'shas Adchak, we just saw that Gemara, that if it's time, we didn't, like in the party of Reb Shimon Levi's kids, his wedding, they didn't have time to say Shema. They fell asleep, they were drunk. So you can even do it after Alois. You can even do it still later into the morning, but absolutely not past Nates. Of course, now that's already no longer a chance. That is the basics of the Mishnah, first Mishnah in Brachas that we've seen. Now we have the second Mishnah in Brachas. Says the Mishnah, second Mishnah in Brachas. Remember the Gemara told us in the beginning of Beis that we are going to now talk about Shachris for a bit and then go back to Arvas. Because once we're a ton of Mil de Shachris, we're going to stick with Shachris. So it says the Mishnah, when do you say Shema in the morning? I made the joke last time about being a Tziyani. We're not going to make it this time. But the basic premise of the Tanakama is that you can say Kriya Shema of Shachris when you can tell the difference between blue and white. Rabbi Lezer Omer, between blue and green. The Garmer Adon Eitzachama, and you have until Nates in order to say Shema. According to this man, the Amar, you can only say Shema until Nates. After Nates, you're done. Thank God for Rabbi Shua. Yes? Rabbi Shua Omer, Ad Shalish Shoas, you have until 3 hours in the day. Shekain Derech Malachim, Lav Shalish Shoas, because you have the Derech of the Malachim, right? The Jewish people, or B'nai Malachim, they got up 3 hours into the day. What happens if somebody didn't have a chance to say Shema and 3 hours a day passed on by? And nevertheless, he's not lost out. He can still say the brachos of Shema. He can still say the Shema itself, and he will not get the schar of saying Shema, but he will get the schar of reading in the Torah. The Rambam writes, in the Perush Mishnah, this is a proof that is a bigger schar for saying Shema in the right time than it is for learning the Torah. And that's why you're going to be getting this additional schar for Kriya Shema during its right time as well. Okay, continues the Gemara. So we just saw a couple of opinions about when the earliest time is to say the Shema, and a couple of opinions of when the latest time is to say the Shema. The Gemara now going to explore it a little bit. Continues the Gemara. My bein tchelas lavan. What is the difference between blue and white? What does it mean? Tchelas lavan. If you're going to say the differences between like a pile of tchelas wool and a pile of white wool. Remember, we're talking about a situation on a normal night where there's some sort of a moon, some sort of light that's coming. You can tell the difference between blue and white, even if there's no light pollution that we have today, you can still see the difference between a whole massive pile of tchelis dika wool versus love and dika wool. You can see the difference. Not such a complicated task. So even in the middle of the night, you can say it's that's my kriyashma. Clearly not. So the Gemara says, nami mediyad. Everyone would even be able to tell at night. Ela ben tchila shaba, love and shaba. Here we have Machlokes Rashi test. What does it mean? Ela ben tchila shaba, love and shaba, says Rashi. Rashi says, what does it mean? Tchila shaba, love and shaba. Gizas temer shetzava tchilas. You have some wool, right? A strand of wool that was made tchilas. V'yesh b'mekemish loy Allah shamat tzeva yafa. And there were parts of it that weren't really done well. So those parts are still the natural color, which is white. And so the question is on that strand of wool that you have to be able to see the difference between the blue and the white in that strand, right? In that piece of wool that was ready dyed tchelis but wasn't fully done. So you had parts of it that are lavan. That's where you have to be able to tell the difference between tchelis and lavan. This is according to the way Rashi understands. Tais disagrees. Top Taisus. Says El, and this is by the way also sheet of the Rambam, the Persian Mishnah. The Rambam goes with the Taisus as well. Says Taisus, Perish Rashi, the Matzavot, Chelis, Viesh, Mekam, Shloy, Allah, Shamat, Sefer, Shaper, for Taisus, Vikasha, the Amin, Menachas, Ra mitzvah zu, Shabbat, totally mitzvah cheres. Here, this mitzvah of tzidus, you have a mitzvah that's totally in something else. Kriyashma. What is totally in the mitzvah of tzidus? Also the mitzvah of Kriyashma. What do you mean? Kidetanan, Achiyak, Ben Chelis, Lavan, right? Because if you can see the difference between your Chelis and your Lavan and your tzidus, right? They wore Chelis in those days. I'm not getting into nowadays. That'll be whole other topic. We'll get to Menach. We'll discuss that, but that's in many years. In any event, for the purposes now, the Taisus Kasha is the mitzvah of tzitzis. We're being told there in Menachas is there's a mitzvah there, obviously of tchelas, of the tzitzis, and there's another mitzvah tolina, which is the shema, because now you tell the difference between the blue and the white. If you're talking about just a strand of wool, what's that have to do with the tzitzis? What does that have to do with the mitzvah totally another mitzvah? Maybe even at night you can see things, and therefore, if a strand of wool is not dyed correctly, it has parts of it that are white. Maybe you can still tell. Akarcha says, what we're talking about is what do you mean tchel shabbat, love and shabbat? We're talking about tzitzis. Whereas the tzitzis has tchelis in it, and it has love in it. And you'll be able to look at your tzitzis, and you see the difference between blue and white in your tzitzis. So that's what I mean. So what's the machlokes between Rashi and Tchelis Shabbat, love and Shabbat? Is are you looking at some random piece of wool that has been dyed tchelis that has parts of blue, or are you looking at your tzitzis to see the difference between the tchelis and the lavan? Okay, fine. Continues the Gemara. Says the Gemara, more opinions as to when you are able to say Shema during Shacharis. Tan Rabbi Meir and Mashiach and say Kelev. Be able to tell the difference between a dog and a wolf. Obviously, we're not talking here about what's the name of the little cute dog? Chihuahua? No, there was another one. The one smushy face. My wife. What's it called? No. No, whatever it's called. It's a small little cute dog. Well, obviously not talking about the little tiny pug. I don't know what type of dog it is, but a little pug and a big wolf. Yeah, this is not what we're dealing with. What do you mean between Zev and Kela? We're talking about like an Arctic. What do they call it? Aleutian, Alaskan. What do they call it? The husky, right? Something that like the cry of the call of the wild, right? Jack London. Was it Jack London? Whatever the guy's name was, he wrote a book called The Call of the Wild over there. I mean, there was the dogs. One of them, he went back to live with his cousins, the wolves. I mean, that's what we're dealing with. Someone's in a situation where it's obviously going to be a challenge, not a kind of a dog where there's no question about between a zev and a kelb. Yeah, between a donkey, a home donkey, a regular donkey, and a right is like a wild donkey. I have no idea what it is, but Rashi says the chamor habor. Fine, okay, comes to the wild dog. When Cherem says no, what it's talking about is when are you able to say Shema and the Shachris? When you can see a friend from 4 Amis and recognize them. We'll get to let's first go to Rashi Tesis over here, and then we'll come back. Okay, so if it says Rashi, what are we dealing with? We just did the Rashi. Fine. So let's look at Tesis. Tesis says, what does it mean? Acherim. Acherim says until you can see your friend Dalet Amis, Yerushalmi b'Ma'anan Kaiman. What kind of a friend are we talking about? Says the Yerushalmi. If it's like a good friend, then even if he's not 4 amas, he's 10 amas. You can still see the difference between the Mibisha and a Ruggle. If you don't know the guy, really, I feel we carve the guy, but even if he's really close to you, you wouldn't be able to know who he is. So Tifta Baruggle and a Ruggle, yeah, it's a kind of a person that you know, but you're not like best friends, but it's like, it's not your BFF. It's somebody that you know, and you see him from time to time. So in that kind of a situation, yeah, din achsanya the and he comes from time to time. So that kind of a person, if you recognize them, so then you know it's time to say Shema. Tzarich loymar. Now, Tesis gets into a topic that is just juicy. I have to go through it. Tesis explains that it can't be when it says Acherem that it is Rameir, because Rameir just said before that, right? Rameir said that we're taking the difference between Zev and a Kelev, and Acherem is same Mashir Eschavei Rafi Dalam. So what is Tesis talking about? In order to understand the background of this Tesis, we have to go through a bit of Gemara. The Gemara tells us in her is Yud Gimel Amud Beis. The Gemara says that there was a Maisa. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nassan got upset, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, and so they wanted to mess around with him, and they were planning on slugging him up and showing him up in the middle of Shir. People got wind of this plot, and they prepared Rabbi Shimon Gamliel that he has to learn the Gemara really well for the Shir in order to be able to get out of this plot. And that's what happened. But he was very angry at them, so he punished them. The Gemara says there, they said we're going to punish them. We're no longer going to say any over Shmaitis in their name. We're going to call now Rabbi Meir, instead of saying Rabbi Meir, we're going to call him Acherim. And we're going to call Rabbi Nassan the Yesh Erben. This becomes their monikers, sobriquets. Yes, those are the names that they get known as a punishment for what they did to, or what they were trying to do to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Oh, good. You're jumping. Yes, but that's where I'm going. So that's the Gemara there in Haris. Then the Gemara says that Rabbi is learning with his kid, his own kid's name, Rabbi Shimon. The whole family, it's very hard to know. Everyone's a Shimon Gamliel, like there. So he's learning with his kid. This kid says to now we're on Yudal enough. Me, haim, hello, who are these people that we learn from their Torah, but we don't even know their names? He says, Adam, the people that they wanted to take away our honor, the honor of our house. So the son says back, so he says in Koheles, these people are long dead, the fights are long gone. Everybody machin shalom, like, okay, let's move on. Why do you have to be still fighting the battle? Took place generations ago, we're still saying Acherim. Come on. So Rabbi said, okay. So what Rabbi started to do was he would say, Mishum Rabbi Meir. He would say in the name of Rabbi Meir, but Rabbi Meir, Loy Omar. He would say only Mishum Rabbi Meir. Fine, that's how he dealt with it. Now, take one step. Just understand, before we go any further, that I'm looking now, and you have it in your brachos, the Hakdama of the Rambam to the Perush Mishnah, which will be a topic on Sunday mornings. Not giving a shout out to it, I'm just saying this will be a topic Sunday morning Teresh B'Peh at some point. I don't know when, probably second half of the year, maybe eventually we'll get to it. But I'm quoting here from the last page, at least in mine, or the second to last page in my Hakdama to the Perush Mishnah of the Rambam in Perek Shishi. Over there, the Rambam writes the following. The Rambam writes, he brings down the story here of the Gemara in Haris. And he also talks about the fact that we know, Avol Stam Mishnah. What is a Stam Mishnah in Shas? Hu Mashis Gimel of Das Rabbim. This is what everybody agreed to. Vishvasa Iyunim Boy. V'lo Nefel B'Machlekes. Eshikablu Rabbim B'Pi Rabbim. Ad Moshe. Kvi Hashachalagim B'Fsichas Devarenu. This is an accept. Whenever you have a Stam Mishnah, it means everybody agrees. Everyone agrees. There's no disputing about it. V'Makabel HaKorov She Nisyaches Elov HaMaimer Hu Rabbi Meir, and the kabbalah that we have is who's the man Omer of that Mishnah, a Stam Mishnah, and the Mishnah is who? Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. V'zeu inin she'amu Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir. This is what it means when it says Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir. El b'miktas tuma she'efshel lem Rabbi Meir levada vel machlokas yil ish acher chutz Rabbi Meir Talmud Yivar Eisem. Fine, that's something we have a little bit of a discussion. The Gemara, the Talmud, whatever. What do we want to see from this? Just point one is that no matter what you want to say, Rabbi didn't want to call him Rabbi Meir, Mishum Rabbi Meir, Acherim. Stam Mishnah was Rabbi Meir. Whatever that Gemara is telling us in Hiris, Rabbi Meir, nevertheless, whatever the battles were between his family, he was put down the Mishnayos as a Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. And that's the basic law. That's the black letter law. When he has to put in a man Omar, that's when it's not as strong. That's when there's machlekes, and that's when there's disputation. But the pashut understanding of all chayos of all time that the Mishnah is based upon the person who he had a dispute with his family. Good, clear. Next, there is a point that this Taisus is making. Taisus is saying, oh, this Manda Amar of Acherim is disagreeing with Rabbi Meir. They can't be the same person because obviously Rabbi Meir was already discussed. And therefore, says Taisus, it has to be, therefore, says Taisus, that Sorachem the Hayachem is not Rabbi Meir because Rabbi Meir was already mentioned. This position of Taisus comes up also in Saita. The more in Saita also there was dashing the pasuk of Taiv that Vatera Iseki Taiv at its Bnei Shloshi Rachim, and they saw Moshe Rabbeinu was Taiv. What does it mean that Moshe Rabbeinu was Taiv? So Rabbi Meir says Taiv Shemai, and Acherim over there says that he was not Mahol. So there Taisus also dealing with the same point. Oh, how could it be? There's two guys. One is Acherim and one is Rabbi Meir. How could they both be mentioned? And Taisus there says that he heard that in some book in Sarfas, they have a tradition that Acherim is anything that was Rabbi Meir quoting Acher. That Rabbi Meir quoted his own Rebbe, he called them Acherim. Says that's not Mustafa to say that. No, says we know why there's an Acherim, we know what is the Yeshem, we have the Gemara in Arias. Says Taisus, I'll give you a different approach. What's Taisus' approach? What's the reason why it says Acherim and what it says in Rabbi Meir? How could they both be? Taisus it happened at different times. At different times. In other words, when he was out of love, they called him Acherim for a sheet that he mentioned then. When he was back in the fold, he said he's Taiv, that's the name. So that's why it's included as Rabbi Meir. Different times of Rabbi Meir's own evolution in his relationship with Rabbi Meir, with Rabbi. That's Taisus' answer over there. Why Taisus doesn't suggest that over here, I'm not sure. But Taisus doesn't suggest that over here. Here, Taisus assumes that Acherim can't be Rabbi Meir. Sorry, we have to finish. But before we leave this topic, we have to move on. Is two more points. One is the Gemara in Eruvin that you mentioned. The Gemara in Eruvin, Yud Beis, the Gemara tells us that there was Rabbi said about himself that he saw the back of Rabbi Meir, and that's how he got to be such a good learner. And had he seen him by front, in other words, if he would have had a relationship with him, he would have been way, way better. Which again helps us understand the Gemara in Harias. But one additional point: the Gemara there says that his name was not Rabbi Meir. His name was Rabbi Nechemia. His name was Rabbi Neharoi. And the Rambam in the Pirush HaMishnah says that they mean the same thing, Neharoi and Meir. They both mean that he's shining a light, right? Because Rabbi Meir was such a genius, he could be, and that's what we know, passing like them the halacha, except when we have stam mishnahs, because of the fact that he was too brilliant for everybody to even follow what he had to say. Last point, there's the Mishnah, very last Mishnah in Kedushin. Very last Mishnah in Kedushin tells us that two shitas. Rabbi Meir says that what is he going to teach his kid in the umnis? I'm going to teach him an umnus nakiya of a kala. I'm going to teach him a light umnus so you can have the time to learn, have a normal life. And Rabbi Naharoi says in the very same Mishnah, I'm not going to teach my kid any umnus. I'm only going to teach him Torah. To me, the same way that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Naharoi, who are the same person according to the Gemara in Erev and Gimel, can be listed in the same Mishnah. Why can't we say it over here and use the answer of Taisus in Saita on Yud Beis rather than the answer of Taisus here in Brachot Tessamon base. Good. All right. Moving on. Continues the Gemara. Says the Gemara. So we just said all the different sheets about when the earliest time is to be able to take Kriyat Shema of Shachris. So what is the halacha? Rav Huna halacha ka'acherim. Rav Huna says the halacha is like acherim. That the proper time to be able to say Shema in the morning is when you can see a friend. Again, as Taisus pointed out, not exactly such a close friend. When you can see him, that's when you're able to say Shema of Shachris. Amar Abaya, let's fill in ka'acherim l'kriyat Shema kevasikin. According to Abaya, the tefillin, and we're also going to see Kriya Shema is like a cherem. That is an earlier time, and for Kriya Shema, it's like the vasikin. What does it mean, the vasikin? It means that the vasikin was finished saying Shema with nates. The vasikin would finish the Shema with the nates. Because you can't say the Shemana Esrei before nates. Again, b'shas chak you could, but ideally you shouldn't be saying it before the nates. So you say the Kriya Shema right before the nates and the Shemana Esrei right after the nates. So according to the way Abai is learning, the tefillin is like a cherem. That's an earlier time. As Rashi points out, you have to have tefillin on before you say the Shema. And for the Shema, it's like the vasikin, which sounds like the only time to say Shema is with right before the Netzach Hama. This is the Gemara until here. Right now we have to jump to Taisus. Big Taisus here. We have to do it quickly. I'm sorry. Says Taisus Tema. Bomb question. What's the question? We just saw before. We just did this Gemara that you're able to say b'shas chag at least. You're able to say Shema even earlier. So what do you mean that you're saying Shema now like only like the Vasikin? This is Taisus' question.
Come on, Paskin, I look Rabbi Shua, Damad Gimel Shoes. You're going to see that you able to say Shema until 3 hours into the day. V'haka Pasuk Abaya Shu Basra, and here Abaya, who's the Basra, is later than everybody else. The Omar Vasikin, he's telling you that the only time you can say Shema is with the Vasikin, which means right before Nates. Mumash B'Dach Hilchas, it's Mashmat Halachas like Abaya. That's Tosfos' kasha. Shloim B'Devadei Zman Kriyas Shema Maschel Achar Murashachar says Tosfos for sure that the Zman of Kriyas Shema, at least B'Shas Chak, starts after Murashachar. Zman Ad Gimel Shos, and you have until 3 hours into the day to say it. Umiu Mitzvah Min HaMuvchar Give Vasikim, but the Mitzvah Min HaMuvchar is to say it like the Vasikim, which is Samach L'Netzachama Kedei Lismach Gula L'Tfilah. And even the Vasikim would also agree with Rabbi Shua they have until 3 hours. We are saying on this. We are able to say Shema all the way until 3 hours into the day. But of course, ideally, we want to say it with the Netzachama, like the Vasikim do it. I'm going to skip the next couple of lines of the Tosfos, and then jump a little bit later when the text says umiu kasha, frag text says umiu kasha. The amina biyuma afi asa neveshes zav. The mission says that Helene Amalka, she made some sort of a candelabra of gold. When it would shine, the gold, the sun would shine on the gold. There would be like shadows, sparks, like would be something that people could see from far away. But and they would know it's nice, and they're able to say Shema. But it's my crash, the Gemara explains over there, who was the one who would be saying Shema at that time? It would be the rest of the people in Yerushalayim. Why? Because the Anshe Mishra and the Anshe Maimin, they had to say Shema at a different time. So the only people that we're talking about who be looking at this sign of seeing when the thing was shining would be the rest of the people. That's what they would say Shema. So therefore, says Tosfos, I have a kasha. V'lo have a kivasikin. Shoy karen manetzachama. Shoy karen manetz. Somach la'anetz. So this you see that the Sha'ar Am of Yerushalayim would not say Shema by the nates. They would be saying it at after the nates, right? Because you need the sun to be shining on the candelabra in order to be able to get it everybody to see it. So you see clearly now, like Abaya, this is the Tosfos kasha. V'yeshleim da'osis man hukbal tzibur. That's the time that it was made for the masses, because they couldn't make it early like the Vasikim. Most people don't know exactly when the nates is, so therefore this is the time that it says to say Shema. But ideally, of course, you say it earlier. I have to leave with one bomb question. Yeah, I don't have an answer all these years. I don't know. Tosfos doesn't ask. Tosfos is asking like, oh, it's such a strong question. Gemara and Yuma, I don't know. You have to say, what does it mean? Sha'ar Am Yerushalayim. The Gemara in Yuma tells us, Lamed Zayin Amabeis. After saying, who is this person that's going to be looking at the sign of the candelabra that's shining? Who's the one who's getting this tremendous sign out of it? After all, this you need it to say Shema, but who's doing it? The Anshe Mishma, Anshe Mam? No, says the Gemara. Oh, it's the Sha'ar Am Yerushalayim. It's the rest of the people that they're going to use that sign to be able to say Shema. Who's the man, the Omar? Amar Abaya, L'Sha'ar Amud Yomi. Abaya is the one who said it. Abaya is the one who's saying the answer that it's talking about the Sha'ar Amud Yomi. They're using the sign after the nates in order to know when to say Shema. And Abaya is the one who's telling you that over here the halach is Kriyash Shema Kivasikin. Abaya is not being serious himself. So obviously, what does he mean? It must be that the ideal time to say Shema is of course like the Vasikin. But if you have, of course, if you don't have the time, Sha'ar Amud Yomi, they have much more time. Push it. I don't understand. Tosfos is asking at the kasha. He's so bothered. It's a pashut answer to me. Okay, moving on. And more than that, Tosfos, if you look at the beginning of Tosfos, that Tosfos umashim the haki hilchasa, right? If you remember the first part of Tosfos, she said, "This is the halacha like Abaya, like it's a pashut." Abaya is not contradicting himself. There must be this answer. Fine. Continues the Gemara, and now we explain a little bit about the Vasikin. So we say as follows. Yeah, Vanessa Spalbium, Amar Abizera, my car. What does it mean in Pasuk when the Pasuk is telling us Yeruchim Shemesh Lefnei Arech Dar Dar? And what does it mean? They're going to be fearful with the sun and in front of the moon generations. Hey, Rabbi Yossi ben Eliakim, Mishum Kehola Kadisha B'Yerushalayim, right before the Kila Kedusha in Yerushalayim, right? Some of the various different shuls over the years name themselves Kila Kedusha. This is where it comes from. And anybody who is going to see the lucky is going to be lucky enough to be able to be Semech Gula Tefillah. He's not going to get damaged the whole day. Amar Abzera, is that really true? Says Abzera. Though I know Samchi Vitziki, I in fact did be Semech Gula Tefillah and I got hurt. Amar my Itzikis, how did you get hurt? The Amtias Asel Be Malka, because you were part of the group that had to bring the crown of the myrtle to the emperor, to the governor. Don't be so upset that they made you go and bring this to the governor, and you're annoyed because the waste of your time. At the end of the day, you should know that you're supposed to be paying for the honor of seeing the kings. Why? Because we have a Gemara more later on in Ches. A person should run to go see the kings of the Jewish people. Not just the kings of the Jewish people, even to see the kings of the Goyim. Because if you're going to be zecher to see the kings of the Goyim, you'll be able to make the differentiation between the malachim of the Jewish people versus the malachim of the non-Jewish world. I just want to point out that Reb Zera is so upset that he was forced to go and to give a crown to the governor. He feels very bad about it, and it's like he feels that he was mazik, even though they said anybody down like Vasikin is not going to be mazik. I find it to be unbelievable because the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin Chav Hey that Reb Zera's father was the tax collector for the governor. Right in Bavel, right? He was the tax collector, so like he grew up knowing about the Malchus. So I don't know, like. But nevertheless, he was still so bothered. Okay, this is what it is. Amar le Rabbi Ilah leUla. Rabbi Ilah said to Ula the following: Ki ayas lahasim. When you're going to get back to Bavel, show b'shloma de Rabbuna echo achi b'mayim kol achabur. Please ask about my brother Rabbuna in the group when everybody's around. Talk about him. Talk about him publicly, right? Where do we see this kind of a thing? Ayeh Sarah Ishtacha, right? The Gemara tells in Baba Tzia. Why did they say Ayeh Sarah Ishtacha? They know what Sarah is. No, to make him more chaver to the husband. So you ask about Rabuna in public, ask about him. It's going to make him like be more beloved to the people. It's going to be sure everybody's curious. No, ask Rabuna. The Adam Gadol, B'samach mitzvahs. He's a great person. He's misamech mamash in the mitzvahs. And what's the big proof? What does this Gemara have to do with us? Zimna chadach samach gula tefillah pasuk choichem mebhum bekol yoma. He mamish one time was samach gula tefillah, and he was smiling the whole day. He was so excited about it. He was great. He was so happy. Hey chibati sabach. And the Gemara then has literally a repeat of Gemara. So now we're going to fly through it, but it's a repeat of the Gemara that we have already had. The Gemara asks, no, how are you able to be samach gula tefillah? Rabbi Yochanan b'tchilah hu omer Hashem tzvasi tiftach, and b'soif hu omer he wasn't mefi. How could you be samach gula tefillah and you say Hashem tzvasi tiftach, or he wasn't mefi? You're not being samach, right? Because you have an interruption in between gula and tefillah. So Amar Blezer tehei b'tefillah shel arvis. Maybe you should say that when we say Hashem tzvasi tiftach, it's only by Ma'ariv, not by Shachris. Amar Rabbi Yochanan is open on Ma'abah zeh samach gula tefillah shel arvis. Rabbi Yochanan says you have to be some good tefillah even at night, so it's not going to help you. You know what you should say? Hashem supposed to tiftach only by mincha, not by shachas or by arvis. Rav Ashi says no. Rav Ashi, I feel tefillah kulu. You could say Hashem supposed to tiftach by every Shemona Esrei. If it came in the kfur rabbanim b'tefillah, tefillah richta dami. Once it becomes part of the Shemona Esrei, then it's just considered tefillah richta. Because if you don't say this arvis hechim ati samach, then how are you ever going to be samach gul tefillah by night? Once we say that there's the kind of hashkivenu, it's like a gula richta, even though you just already said Gal Yisrael. Nevertheless, Hashkivenu, and remember Taisus and Dalan and Beis, we also saw already Taisus before Dalan and Beis. It said about Baruch Hashem, right? Yom Yom. It's also part of the Tefillah Rechta and Kaddish. All part of it. All Tefillah Rechta. It's not a problem. It's not going to be a contradiction to being Semach Gula to Tefillah. So it becomes the Tefillah Rechta. We are done. I just mentioned the bottom Taisus called Sem Gula Tefillah. Taisus asks. What's like he's so happy, like you're not going to be nizdik a whole day. Everyone's semigul to tefillah. Says no, it's being semigul to tefillah by the vasikin, not just regular. Have a wonderful day.